the most prolific firearms inventor of all time. Now, when you think of guns, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it the M16? What about the 1911? Or maybe the AK-47? Well, all those are amazing firearms, but none of them were made by John Browning. You see, while he didn't invent gunpowder or the basic design of the firearm, he did invent a bunch of the most iconic firearms ever made, including the Winchester Model 1894, the first commercially successful lever-action rifle, the Colt M1911, one of the most popular handguns in history, and the Browning automatic rifle, which was the standard arm of the U.S. military throughout World War II and Korea. Not to mention, he also designed arguably the most iconic shotgun ever made, the Remington Model 870, which has sold more than 10 million units since its introduction in 1900 and is still in production today. And his designs weren't just limited to repeating arms. He also invented the first commercially successful machine gun, the Colt M1895, as well as the first practical semi-automatic shotgun, the Winchester Model 1897, which was used by both the U.S. Army and Navy. So how exactly did John Browning manage to invent so many iconic firearms? Well, first off, he had a photographic memory, which allowed him to take one look at a complex mechanism and immediately know how it worked. But perhaps more importantly, he was incredibly prolific. Just listen to this. Between 1878 and 1926, John Browning filed 128 patents for firearms and their components. That's nearly one patent per week for nearly 50 years. And most of his designs remain in production to this day. But like any great inventor, Browning's story didn't start with a bang, but rather with a whimper. In fact, his first attempt at inventing a firearm was actually a total failure. You see, in 1874, Browning was hired by Winchester Repeating Arms to fix some of their rifles that kept misfiring. But instead of just fixing them, Browning decided to try and improve upon the design. He came up with an entirely new loading system, which was a major departure from the traditional single-shot break-open actions that Winchester was known for. His idea consisted of a tubular magazine that was located under the barrel and was accessed through a port in the side of the receiver. This would allow the rifle to be loaded through the side without having to break it open, which was a much faster and more convenient way to load a rifle. Winchester liked the idea, so they bought the patent from Browning and installed him as head of their research department. However, when they tried to put his new loading system into production, they quickly found that it was too complicated and expensive to manufacture. So they abandoned the project and sent Browning back to his original job of fixing rifles. But Browning was undeterred. You see, while his side-loading magazine hadn't worked out, he knew that there was still a lot of potential in that design. So instead of trying to invent something completely new, he decided to try again to simplify and refine his design until it was cost-effective to manufacture. And after several years of tinkering, he finally came up with a design that met Winchester's price point. It was the legendary Winchester Model 1873. Its side-loading action was now powered by a lever, which made it much faster and easier to use. And its innovative use of interchangeable parts made it cheaper and easier to manufacture. The result was a resounding success. The 1873 sold more than 750,000 units and established Winchester as a major player in the firearms industry. It also made Browning famous in the firearms industry and set the stage for the rest of his career. In the coming decades, Browning would go on to invent some of the most prolific firearms in history, including the Colt M1911 and the Browning automatic rifle. And although many of his designs were initially met with the same skepticism from industry executives that he had faced at Winchester, his persistence and belief in his own designs eventually paid off. For example, the Colt M1911 was initially rejected by the military as too complex for the average soldier. But Browning continued to refine the design, and eventually the M1911 became the standard sidearm of the U.S. military and remains in use to this day. So the next time you pick up a gun, take a moment to appreciate the incredible legacy of John Browning, the man who revolutionized firearms forever. Thanks for watching.